Here we are going to be doing a demonstration of how to create a linked list class and manipulate them. So the first thing you are going to do is fire up your IDE. Right now I'm using IntelliJ IDEA. So if you use an Eclipse or a text editor, just fire them up. It's the same process. Create a new project. And make sure your project SDK is targeting 1.8, the Java version of 1.8, as of right now. Then click on the next. Make sure this is unchecked. We don't need this. We are going to write everything manually. And in the project name, you should name this something else. So I'm going to name mine tutorial 1. And you'll see why I'm naming this. So we're just going to wait for this to boot, and then you can close this. And now we have the interface of the IDE. So if yours is like this and you're confused about how to set things up, just click on this, where you have the source folder. So you're going to right click on this, then on new. We are going to create a new Java class. And the name of this class is going to be tutorial 1. So the name of your file has to match the name of your project. So this is tutorial 1. And now I have my introductory class. Now the next thing I want you to do is we are going to write our main method here inside of this class. Now I already have my main method inside of the class. So if you're not really accustomed to writing this offhand, you don't need to worry about it. When you write about 20 or 10 Java projects, this will come in to you naturally. So the first thing we want to do before or when creating a linked list is we have to create a node class. So if you remember, I told you that a linked list is basically a bunch of nodes pointing at each other. Now we have to create a form or a way to actually store information in those nodes, and that's how we are creating a separate node class. So in this video I'm going to create a separate node class. Some people create it together, it doesn't really matter, but I like to be able to reuse my node class. Okay, so if you don't want reusability, you can create it together with your linked list class, but if you want it to be reusable for future purposes, then you create them in separate files or separately. So the first thing we are going to do now is create a node class. You name this node, and what we want this node to contain, in the sense that what do you want your node to store? Well, we want it to be able to store a data and a next pointer. And this next pointer should hold a variable to the next variable. So you would understand that in a few seconds. So let me just write this down. Now I have set the variables that our node is going to contain. This node is going to hold an integer variable named data, and it's going to also hold a next pointer. Now we are going to create a public constructor for our node class. And if you don't know what a public constructor is, it's basically it gives us the ability to be able to instantiate a node class. So if we don't have a constructor, we can never make multiple node instances. So this is what we are going to be doing. So we say public node int data and node next. And now we are just going to set the values to the separate variables. Now we've created our constructor, and there are actually various ways you can create a constructor. So if you wanted to avoid writing this.data, the only thing you would have to do is name this or this a separate name. So for instance, if I had named this data here and named this just data here, the only thing that I would have to do is set this to data. So I wouldn't need this next or this behind this. But it's just personal preference. I like using this. It doesn't really matter. We can have more than one constructor in a class. So if you wanted to create an empty node class, you could have a public node empty class here. It doesn't really matter. It's allowed, okay? But for this example, we are not going to have an empty node class or an empty node constructor, sorry. So if you look at what I did here, this is actually breaking the rule of information hiding. I am setting my data to public and my next pointer to public, and this is bad programming practice when you're creating a node class. You should always set this to private and use getters and setters to retrieve data from a node class. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this to private. So it's only going to be accessible within the class. And now we are going to create getters and setters for our class node. So to create a getter, you just say public, the return type, which is int, and then I'm going to name this getData. Basically, this function, or this method rather, is going to return the data inside of the node, okay? So when you're creating a node class, you just have to think of it as creating just one node, okay? Think of one node right now. Don't think of various nodes. Just think of one particular node. So we say return data. The next thing we are going to do is create a getter for our node, our next pointer, and it will be getNext. So this, if you've guessed, is return next. If you want to follow along or you want to watch this and then do it later, it's your personal preference. Whichever way is more suitable for you is allowed. So now that we've created our getters, now it's time for our setters. And basically, setters allows you to set the data in a node, okay? So we are going to have, and you see what I'm talking about here. So when we have void set next, or let's say set data. So if you wanted to set a new form of data or a new data for a particular node, we say set data. But usually in a linked list, I do not like manipulating my data. You can write this if you want. I find that you would only necessarily use the set next setter. So I'm going to write this now. So if we need the set data, we'd come back to this class and manipulate it, okay? So this would be so basically what we've done here, or what we are doing here, is setting a next pointer, okay? So this means the root node. And if you don't understand what the root node is, it's basically this particular node, the node you're working on. And if you don't understand this right now, you're going to understand it when we work on several projects from this, okay? So now that we've created a class node, the next thing we are to create is a linked list class, okay? So this is not the linked list at all. This is definitely not the linked list. We've created something that we can use for the linked list. And now if we just come here and say class linked list, and what we are going to do is create one node for our linked list, and then we continue from there, okay? So we are going to create a node called top, and we're going to name this, we're going to keep this as private. So this node is going to be private, and basically what we have here is, now that we've created a type or a variable named top, this top has two instances, okay? So it has a data and it has a next pointer, okay? So it's basically empty for now because we've not specified anything. Now let's create a constructor for a linked list class. So if we do something like this, now we can create an empty linked list, okay? It's allowed. We can do something like this. Now we can do something like this, okay? And now we have an empty constructor. So basically, we want to initialize top to null, okay? An empty linked list should always be null. That's the idea. So we don't have anything in this list. So we're going to set top to null. So we say top equal to null. Right here, we have an empty linked list, okay? We can do anything we want in this linked list class, but I'm going to leave that for the next video, okay? But we are going to go through everything again. So the summary of what we did is we created a node class and we are using this node class in our linked list class. So that's the only thing we did. We haven't done anything complex yet. So if you have any problem understanding anything, make sure to use the discussion forums and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.